Thank you everyone for joining us today. This presentation is an introduction to knowledge management, the role it plays inside of organizations, and some of the basic elements that you need to put in place to improve how your organization deals with and benefits from its collective information, knowledge, and expertise. So if you're new to knowledge management, or maybe if you're not, but you need a refresher or you'd like one, we're here to get you up to speed today. So my name is Lauren Trees. I lead the Knowledge Management Research Program at APQC. I have been involved in studying and researching knowledge management here for 10 years. I've been here a little bit longer, working in other areas. And I have researched pretty much every aspect of knowledge management at this point, from communities of practice, enterprise social networks, all different types of collaboration, to knowledge transfer, applying critical knowledge within your organization, some new technologies around content management, new strategies for engagement, really, measurement, strategy, every aspect of the knowledge management life cycle we have done some research on in the last decade. And I am here with my colleague, Cindy Hubert.
Thank you, Lauren. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Lauren, thanks for letting me join you on this introduction. I have been involved in our knowledge management research and delivery of our KM services for over 2 decades. So all the things that Lauren just talked about in terms of our research, I have been on our client and member side delivering those things. So learning a lot about what works, what doesn't, what best practices will fit into different contexts. And yes, there have been highs and lows along this journey, but it's been a heck of a journey and a lot of fun. And I'm just very excited to be here with you today to talk about some of the real important things that people just need to know, I would say, that are essential in getting started.
Absolutely, and we've got both of our emails up on the screen, and we encourage you to reach out if you have questions that are not answered in this presentation or some of the other resources that are available to you in APQC's knowledge base. So welcome to Knowledge Management for those of you who are new. We are very excited to be introducing you to this world of KM that we spend most of our time in. We're going to talk through some of the basics of knowledge management today in terms of what is knowledge, why is it important to the enterprise, what is knowledge management. That term trips a lot of people up because of the management part of it. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means to us and the kinds of things that are included in knowledge management when we talk about it here at APQC. Some of the types of problems you can solve and opportunities that you can harness with knowledge management, how knowledge is generated and gets where it needs to go, so how it flows through the organization, some key roles and responsibilities for knowledge management, because we all know this doesn't happen on its own. You have to put some resources behind that, and a big part of that is people resources. And then we'll talk through some key enablers for knowledge management and probably end with a few tips and lessons learned.
Let's do it. Very good. So, Lauren, I think one of the most important things you just talked about is the asset that we are actually working with, the raw material called knowledge. And I think that it's important as you get started, or even if you're reinvigorating your knowledge management program, to go back and think about that knowledge. And thank goodness we do not spend a lot of time these days dissecting knowledge and talking about what it is and what it's not. The most important thing to remember is that knowledge is information in action. Thank goodness we simplified this. And what does that mean? Simply that knowledge, a lesson learned sitting in a repository that no one can access or no one can find, is not adding a lot of value, because knowledge has to get used, right? And so that helps simplify when you think about the flow of knowledge, and we'll address that in upcoming slides. But consider your types of knowledge, because it is important for you to think about the types of knowledge. At APQC, we've classified 2 types of knowledge. One is explicit and one is tacit. Now, this may seem very too simplistic for some of you, but don't let it be. Your knowledge itself, and when you start thinking about what is in your organization and what you have to help flow, this will help you always come back and simplify what you need to do from a knowledge management perspective. So explicit knowledge is that you can see. It's easier to document. It may be in your databases, as I said, or the repositories. It's easy to replicate. Usually you can find it and apply it in different scenarios. And it often leads to contributions in efficiencies. You see a lot of our process improvement, Kaizen, all those things are very focused on that process knowledge that flows through our organization. What we have found is that people are most interested in is the tacit knowledge, and that is that resides in our heads, behind the eyes, between the ears, and it's very hard to get to unless someone wants to share. And this is why you've heard about us talking about knowledge sharing all these years. So your tacit knowledge is that is more experiential. It's how you make decisions. It's the repetitive nature of doing your job over and over again, and you just know how to do it, and then you try to share that with someone else, and it's a little complicated. So it becomes especially important when you start thinking about the expertise in your organization, whether or not you need people to share. You need people to contribute to a decision, an innovation, a problem-solving moment, and that's why you need to understand the different types of knowledge that exist. And as you can see, we think that most organizations are really interested in dealing with the tacit, which is about 80% of what we are trying to get to.
Which is not to say that the explicit knowledge isn't important. You definitely need processes to manage that content and deliver it to people. It's just that more organizations have got their arms around that a little bit than the tacit knowledge, which if you don't have a process, you are not going to get that to the people who need it.
Exactly.
And the other thing is that these are not mutually exclusive categories necessarily. There's a lot of explicit knowledge in your organization that really needs the context of tacit knowledge around it. So if you have people write down a process or a design, that may be useful to somebody else who goes into your repository and finds it. But if they could have a 5-minute conversation with the person who created that process and used it with a client formerly and get some of the tips and tricks and context around that, it's going to be a lot more powerful for them when it comes to applying that knowledge to their own business situation.
Absolutely. And this really leads us to, this question about what drives the need to manage knowledge. Why did we start talking about this all along? Well, first of all, one of the factors overall and above is just the time it takes to find information, the explicit, or expertise, the tacit, and people just act without it or don't act at all. And so one of the reasons that we want to manage knowledge is simply because we have to. It's going to have an impact on our business, the efficiency of cost savings, cost avoidance, make competing on our knowledge, which a lot of our member firms do in terms of the higher margin that exists in a project. It's what we know and how we service our customers. Being able to work faster, being more agile, preventing knowledge loss due to any type of people leaving, whether it's through retirement, moving from project to project, and of course just operating efficiently across a global value chain. And then the other thing that's really driving it is just because we can. And boy, have we seen a lot over the last 20 plus years in terms of, first of all, just understanding the differences between tacit and explicit knowledge and how to make it flow. We have the rise of powerful technologies, all supporting communication, collaboration, search, automation. All of those things are here now. They're not just in the future. And of course, we've certainly recognized the ability to be more strategic with our knowledge and make sure that we can manage it. But there's a big difference I want you to think about. As a knowledge management practitioner, one of my early learnings was the need to recognize the difference between knowledge and knowledge management. Knowledge management is not here to manage the knowledge per se. It's there to manage the the processes and the enablers and the approaches that support that knowledge flow. And what we find for knowledge management in the most common objectives that knowledge management has are really these four things. It boils down to four simple ones, Lauren, but certainly there are many more that have been articulated throughout the years. But the first two really deal with about knowledge loss. The first one is about if we are losing knowledge, as I said, from retirement, through projects, people are moving in and out of projects, in and out of roles, people are just trying not to lose their knowledge and make sure we have it captured in some way or embodied in some type of stewardship group that takes knowledge forward and can reuse it again.
Well, and one of the things that we find is that a lot of organizations started their KM programs because they had a big failure or a big missed opportunity to leverage knowledge to prevent something bad from happening or, enable something good to happen. And so that kicks off an effort to not have that happen again and mitigate those kinds of risks in the future.
And I would love to say that we've gotten more proactive with this particular objective. Although I just heard today one of our members say, oh, we're going to have 2,200 of our engineers retire earlier than we thought. We've got to grab their knowledge. So this is a long-term strategy. You'll hear it come under the title of retaining valuable knowledge. We've done a lot of research on that. The second one is really about reuse. And it's just saying if we know how to do something well in one part of the organization and we have repetitive processes throughout the organization or across sites, how are we going to reuse knowledge and best practices? How do we make it accessible, make it where people can find it, and then reuse it? And that drives a lot of efficiencies and just frees up people's time to do other important things for the organization. The third one, we see more and more about people supporting learning and development. You'll hear quite frequently objectives around accelerating the learning curve, getting people's competencies up to speed more quickly. So that's an important aspect of knowledge management in enabling the way people learn and the way an organization retains those learnings.
And we've seen a lot of convergence between knowledge management and organizational learning over the last decade as learning and development programs have moved away from some extent from classroom training, day-long trainings that take people out of the office more towards just-in-time micro-learning, e-learning type of solutions, that there's a lot of affinities between knowledge management from that context and learning, and people are recognizing the role that some of the KM approaches that we're going to talk about later in the presentation can support their learning plans and learning goals for various employees.
And the fourth one, and certainly not of least importance, really deals around innovation. And how do we use our knowledge management approaches and processes to really support the innovation, R&D, improve our services, improve our offerings. And so the creative spirit comes through in the use of knowledge management for your innovation offerings and improving those things that you're taking to market.
Well, and I think a lot of organizations start with the things that are on that because we have to list. They realize people are wasting a lot of time looking for information. They're not necessarily finding what they need, or they have some of these strategic risks. But I think that as they move through it, they find opportunities for because we can to really leverage knowledge as a competitive differentiator and to do things better because they have that knowledge flowing through their organization in a proactive way.
Very good. And so let's recap. Knowledge is information in action. There are two types of knowledge that APQC has defined, explicit and tacit. The need to manage knowledge really comes from that sense of a business imperative, as well as we've just got cool tools and capabilities that allow us to do it better and better. And you've got to set some objectives if you're going to be successful. So, Lauren, what in the world is knowledge management?
Well, we're going to talk through some of the knowledge management fundamentals, and we will start with a definition of knowledge management. And you will see a lot of definitions out there. This is APQC's, which is a systematic approaches to enable knowledge and information to grow, flow, and create value. So often you'll see blog posts and articles about, is knowledge management dead? And often what they're talking about is some very specific definition of knowledge management, for example, as a certain type of software. And we take a much broader view at APQC. Anything that helps a piece of information or expertise, anything on the explicit or tacit continuum that Cindy was talking about a few minutes ago, and gets it to either a system or a person where it can be put into action for the organization and create value. That's part of knowledge management. So as the tools have changed and the methodologies have changed over the 25 years that we've been studying this, the nature of knowledge management changes from, in terms of the day-to-day of how people are doing it. But this fundamental definition stays the same.
It's wonderful. And I love our tagline has always been connecting people to people and people to content.
Absolutely. So the people to content part is important. There's a lot of things that go on there, but the people to people part, if you're not doing that as well, then you're missing out on a whole lot of value that knowledge management can provide to your organization. So this is one of our favorite quotes from our knowledge management expert and guru, Carla Odell, here at APQC, who's currently chairman of our board. Knowledge is sticky. Without processes and a system, it won't flow. And what we mean is people don't necessarily intend to hoard their knowledge, but they hoard their time, they hoard their energy, they don't know what they need to tell other people or where they need to put their information and knowledge, who they need to reach out to. There's a lot of little barriers and silos in your organization that keeps knowledge where it is. It's sticky. It doesn't naturally move through your processes and through your organization in the way that maybe you would like it to. So you need a systematized approach to get that knowledge to go where you want it to go. You can't just let that happen naturally. So that's, I think, a really important fundamental thing to recognize as you start thinking about applying knowledge management in your organization. And I think with things like social networking and working out loud, people have gone back to this idea that it's going to happen naturally without having to do a lot of work. And there are some quick exchanges and things that making collaboration easier can allow you to do, and that's great. But you still, especially for that deep tacit knowledge, need some kind of process and system to make sure that you're extracting it and getting it to the people who can put it into action and create value.
Great. Lauren, for those people just getting started, I think this slide just simply illustrates how exciting the world of KM has been because of what we've learned that works and doesn't work.
Absolutely.
This is great new data that you're sharing with us.
Yeah, so we want to talk about this. I think it's difficult to think about knowledge management in the abstract for a lot of people when you start explaining all these things about information going where it needs to go. What we're really talking about is a series of approaches. And those are all of the techniques and tools and methodologies that you can apply in your organization to get that knowledge flowing where you want it to go. And we just completed our first KM program benchmarks and metrics survey here at APQC. And this is a little bit of data from that in terms of the percentage of KM programs that we surveyed who have each of these approaches in place. And what you'll see is that not every KM program has any particular approach. It's pretty fragmented in terms of the problems you're trying to solve, the opportunities you're trying to go after in the organization. But I tend to think that the approaches that organizations pursue fit into three big buckets. The first is around communities and collaboration, different tools to bring especially cross-functional groups together, get them talking to one another, sharing knowledge in the context of the business, whatever that means for your organization. And then the second one is around this knowledge retention and transfer that Cindy has alluded to earlier. And there's a whole range of different ways to transfer knowledge within the organization. You can have webinars and lunch and learns. You can have interviews that you do with experts and then model or codify that knowledge into tools and content that other people can use. You can have really, people-to-people approaches like mentoring, where you have an expert and a mid-career person who sit and work and learn from one another. There's a lot of different opportunities there. And then the third category is around some of the more explicit knowledge. So content management for documents, and then we see more and more also content management for multimedia content and video content and different things like that. Slightly different systems and processes involved there. So I think most of these approaches that were the 9 most common on our survey fit into one of those categories. I would say lessons learned or after action review, I would put that into the knowledge transfer category. Just less around a discipline or a role maybe, and more around a process or an event.
Very process-based, agreed.
So there's a couple of different ways you can think about all these different approaches that we have in knowledge management. This is one that we like to look at in terms of 4 categories for approaches in terms of what you see on the axes here, the level of human interaction that's involved in that approach. So is it very high touch or is it pretty low touch and self-service? And then on the other axis, the level of tacit knowledge transfer involved. So are you dealing more with explicit knowledge, as Cindy was describing it earlier, or more of that deep expertise and tacit knowledge? And so the first category here is around what we're calling self-service. So these are tools and approaches that allow users to self-service to find knowledge or experts. So you're putting information maybe about processes, standard operating procedures, how-to documents, information about experts so people can find other people within the organization and knowledgeable colleagues. But these are systems that you can put in place, and you got to keep the information in them updated, but then people can go in and self-serve the information and content that they need out of those systems.
Lauren, I've always loved self-service because it's asynchronous. You don't have to, we're global organizations, and so if you have that, you have to think about this approach and a set of tools and processes under self-service that will allow you to let everyone have access 24/7.
Absolutely, and that's becoming more and more important, I think.
Very much so.
And then the next category that we have on here are our process-based approaches. And I was just mentioning lessons learned. I think that's a good example of something that fits into this category. Systematic tools to gather knowledge and reapply in relevant situations. So a lot of your process, based approaches will fit in here. A little bit more human interaction required, a little bit more tacit knowledge because you're capturing some information from people and hopefully giving them some opportunity to dialogue about what happened and what can be improved through the application of knowledge and lessons learned. Then the third category here is around communities of practice. So bringing people, especially cross-functional groups, together to share and learn around some kind of common interest topic. That could be a process, it could be a technical discipline. It could be a strategic challenge that the organization's trying to solve. But so when you're bringing people together, obviously there's going to be a higher touch, more human interaction, and significantly more opportunities to transfer tacit knowledge, bring people together for some of those deeper conversations. And then the final category here is around the transfer of best practice. And this is really when organizations want to take something that is very complex, deep knowledge related to, a process or how the organization does something, and move that to a different team or a different location. It's really going to require a lot of one-on-one or, group-to-group personal interaction to transfer that very complicated knowledge. And you have to choose the opportunities to do things like that very strategically, because obviously as you go up this continuum, there's a lot more resource-intensive options at the top end of the spectrum than when you go down to your self-service. So you've got to choose your opportunities for both communities of practice and transfer of best practices, recognizing that when you have more human interaction, especially human interaction with some of your experts and top performers, there is a limit to how much people can engage in those types of activities, and you want to make sure you're picking the right opportunities.
Lauren, this framework has been so important to us over the years. We discovered it through research years ago. It's grown and evolved, but fundamentally it stayed the same. And the message behind all of this is that you're going to need 2 or more of these approaches to help your knowledge flow, if you're talking about explicit knowledge or tacit knowledge. And this should give you that organizing framework to say, if this is the type of knowledge I'm dealing with, then what type of approaches am I going to need to put in place? And this should be a guiding framework for you.
And we have a lot of different frameworks that you can use to help figure out the right approaches for your organization. One that I would suggest in the knowledge base is our APQC KM portfolio management framework. There's a lot of different tools in there to tell you how to figure out what business problem you should solve through KM, and then to match the right approaches to that problem. So there's a lot of different resources and tools out there to help you figure out which of these categories, and then within the category, what specific approach might be best for a given situation. But regardless of the specific approaches that you put in place, one thing that we have found to be almost universally true across the board is how valuable it is to standardize your knowledge management approaches across the organization, or at least across a large swath of the organization. It helps you reduce silos and promote knowledge reuse. If different teams or functions are all using different methodologies and different systems to store their knowledge and transfer it, then you're creating silos within the organization, and you're not really allowing that knowledge to flow across those functions, across those business units. So there's a huge benefit there in terms of reuse. And this is data from some research we did on what drives the maturity of knowledge management programs. And we found that you can see on the first bar there that organizations with standard methods to capture and retain valuable knowledge, much more successful at reusing knowledge within domains and business units than organizations that don't. We also found that organizations are much more likely to be able to identify and address barriers to sharing and using knowledge if you have standardization. And Cindy and I will both tell you that one of the most common challenges that our members bring to us is, well, we don't know how to get people to share. We don't know how to get people to use these approaches. They say they're too busy. They say that they don't have the time or the energy. So I think that when you standardize, at least you can consolidate your effort and communicate a consistent view of this across the organization. And it really allows you to figure out, well, when people say that they don't have time, what are they really saying? what's the challenge that is there. Sometimes it's as simple as, well, they don't have a charge code for this activity. You know, and when you're trying to do that piecemeal around local initiatives, very difficult. So you can really leverage some economies of scale here. And then finally, I did want to point out that organizations that standardize are 6 times more likely to say that they are able to leverage their knowledge assets for competitive advantage. So they're really getting a lot more value out of their knowledge and able to position that in the marketplace.
I think that standard approaches, and we want to show you that we'll go to our next slide, that they can be put together in a variety of ways, Lauren. And this slide really illustrates and brings to life what you've been describing, because this is Boeing, an aerospace company and member of APQC, and they use a variety of approaches to help their knowledge flow across the organization. I think an important thing to remember is these approaches and enablers that they're using are standardized. So the knowledge management team supports those and makes sure that they work as good as they can across any part of Boeing's enterprise that needs to use them to help their knowledge flow. So it becomes a huge partnership between a knowledge management core team and the business itself. And this is just giving you an illustration. You can see that Boeing uses examples of all the way from search, which would be down in the self-service bucket, to enterprise mentoring, which may result more in a transfer of knowledge and best practices. They have supporting awards, communities, but all of these things are done in a systematic way across Boeing.
And one thing that we should point out is that Boeing's an example of an organization with a mature knowledge management program. They've been doing this a long time. If you are new to knowledge management and your knowledge management program is new, we do not suggest taking on 10 different approaches all at once. You want to pick some specific business problems and pick maybe 1 or 2 or 3 at the most approaches to go after and implement. And then you can add to that portfolio over time and address, you know, both collaboration and knowledge transfer and also content management. And the other thing I would say here is that, you know, if you have another group in your organization like IT that's already doing a great job with search, you may be able to contribute to that initiative. You may not need to have it under the umbrella of knowledge management. So it's not, partnership is important here. So if there are things that your learning team or your IT team are already doing, like mentoring and search, you may be able to leverage what they're doing and talk about it in the context of KM without owning all of those different approaches.
So we've defined knowledge management and what it does. It's about systematic processes and systems that helps knowledge flow. You'll need a portfolio of approaches to make it happen, and there are hundreds, and there's a lot of best practices and lessons learned around those. Standardized approaches are best because they allow those approaches to be used and reused over and over again across the enterprise. So that all begs to be mindful that you're probably going to need some help making that happen. So roles for knowledge management are very important.
Absolutely. We said earlier that some organizations want this to happen naturally. We would love that too. We have not found it to be the case. And even in organizations that set it up to be as self-service as possible, you still need some people driving the ship and figuring out the strategy and supporting the approaches and making it happen. So who are those people? When our Knowledge Management Advanced Working Group looked at this issue a few years ago, they identified together their group of advanced practitioners in the knowledge management field 4 key roles for knowledge management. And they don't necessarily all have to be 4 different people, but you need these roles on your KM core team or your KM central team that supports the knowledge management approaches. So the first is a knowledge management leader, someone to direct the KM effort and align it with the business strategy, you know, liaise with leadership, make sure that the KM program is meeting their expectations and doing something relevant and important and valuable for the business. The second one is a KM specialist. And that's usually a more junior role, though not necessarily, but and KM specialists take on a lot of different functions depending on the approaches that you are supporting. But it's really somebody who supports the design, implementation, maintenance, measurement, and enhancement of KM. So they're a jack of many trades.
It's a big role. Big role. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you're exactly right, because there needs to be an understanding of communities of practice and how those work, how lessons can get embedded into the workflow, how a transfer of critical knowledge is going to work, and how the elicitation will happen with the support and use of a knowledge map. So all of those things are important that the specialist knows.
And then third, you need somebody who's handling marketing and communications for the knowledge management program. We see a lot of organizations create all these great tools and approaches, they put them out there, and then they come back to us and say, well, nobody's using them. What do we do? Well, did you tell people about them more than once? So having somebody who at least part of their role is dedicated to raising awareness about knowledge management, why you would want to participate, what the value is for individuals and for the organization. You definitely want to position your value proposition, both ways, and then to make sure there's change management and a communications plan for ongoing promotion of what you're doing, because it's so easy for people to get excited about things, do it for a couple of months, and then to slip back into their old ways of working. So you definitely want to have communications around that. And then you want some sort of analyst, somebody who is going to support the technology and connect to the business. That's always really important, to make those connections between IT and the business and make sure that what you're doing is aligned with both of those groups.
Absolutely.
But you don't just need people on your knowledge management core team, and especially if you're getting started, you may just have one person or two people, or a few people who are spending some of their time in that core team type of role. So you definitely need to partner with the business and identify people out in the business who can do some of the work of knowledge management. I think we found that to be incredibly critical over the years. So you need somebody to sponsor the knowledge management program, who can advocate for KM, usually in a leadership type of position, and help you communicate with executives and break down barriers and get the resources that you need. You're probably going to need some subject matter experts out in the business to help you with creating and validating content, who are going to share their knowledge, answer questions in communities. They're critical because they're a big source of the knowledge that you want to flow. If you have communities, you're certainly going to want people to lead those communities. That is a critical success factor for communities of practice. You need people who are tasked at least part of the time with making sure that those communities are serving their business purpose and that people's questions get answered and so on. You really want somebody out in the organization who helps build training and awareness for KM in the particular part of the organization. And then we were talking a little bit about this liaison role. That person might be on your KM core team, but you can also have liaisons out in the business who help translate the business needs back to the knowledge management group to make sure that those are met, and then also translate some of the solutions back to the business group to make sure they understand what's available to them and how to take advantage of it.
We've talked so much about roles, and I know if you're just getting started, this looks overwhelming, and you're saying, oh my gosh, I need a team of 55 people, and this is not what we're saying here. We want you to be aware of all the components that may be needed to support knowledge flow. Some of them are very formalized, as Lauren first described, in the core team itself. It may be a percentage of their time that's dedicated to it. We have seen greater success with those that have full-time leader roles with supporting staff, but also then developing those partnerships and having a very strong value proposition, going back to your common objectives. Why is this going to be important to the organization? And that's how you get people engaged and involved in supporting these things in the business.
Yeah, I mean, and we can sit and tell you that you should ideally have this number of people on your core team, but if that's not the reality that you're working in, these business roles and business partnerships become even more important, because the more that you can get the business to do some of this work for you and help you with it, the fewer resources you can survive with on that KM core team and still meet your objectives.
Yes, and we have data to show how important the sponsorship role is. And this will get you started on your path, is getting business people involved in sponsoring your efforts, because it's going to add value for them.
Yeah, in some of our recent research, we asked people about whether they had knowledge management sponsors, and then we correlated that with how effective the knowledge management programs were and how easy the respondents to the survey thought their next KM budget approval was going to be. And what we found was that KM programs who have those business sponsors are significantly more likely to be rated effective by organizational leadership and to feel confident about their next budget approval. So I think we just wanted to include that to emphasize the importance of having a sponsor. And what I would say is, if you don't currently have a sponsor, it's often the clients of the knowledge management program, you know, who are leaders of groups that you've helped, can become those sponsors. So as you look for problems you can solve throughout the organization, you probably want to pitch those to leaders, try to solve their problems through knowledge management. If somebody has a real pain point and that's something that you can help address, then you may be seeding your future in terms of sponsorship, and that can be very helpful. And then I just wanted to spend a few more minutes talking about these business roles. What our research found was that business roles responsible for KM training and awareness, and then these liaisons we keep talking about who help you identify opportunities to apply KM, they lead to higher participation rates in your knowledge management program, and also this likelihood that your knowledge management program is going to be rated as effective by leadership. So just one more plug for putting these business roles in place and engaging some key stakeholders, out in the functions and groups that you want to work with, to help you and support you on this journey.
You'll be glad you did it as you go further and further on this journey. So let's talk just a few minutes. Lauren has spent a lot of time going over some of the roles, and I want to continue talking about what really makes knowledge management successful in an organization. And we'll touch on strategy, people, process, and technology. So remember that the most important thing about knowledge management is that we as knowledge management practitioners exist to help knowledge flow. We're responsible for those processes, the people that support those, technology, and making sure we have good processes for content flow are there so that you will see a cycle of knowledge happen. And there are a lot of knowledge management enablers. As Lauren just discussed, there's a lot of people. One of the things you may want to consider as you're getting started or re-looking at your program and saying, how can I do this better, is to really forge partnerships in the organization to help you. Becoming, partners with information technology specialists and your CIO. Becoming very focused on what's happening with learning and development and partnering with human resources. The same can be said for any of the process improvement efforts you may have underway with Lean or Six Sigma. All of those people are, again, striving towards excellence in the organization, and knowledge management can really get in and support them. So that's a really big piece of advice to say, leverage what you have now and existing people as you're pulling your program together.
And I just want to emphasize for people, we've got people, process, content, and technology at the core of these enablers. And you also see those on the outside of the knowledge flow process as enablers to that knowledge flow cycle that gets knowledge from creation all the way through being reused for business benefit. And a lot of organizations that we talk to focus a lot on these technology enablers and the content enablers. And what we've found is that the people and process enablers are so critical. When we do surveys about what are the barriers that hold you back and what are the challenges that are really difficult to deal with in knowledge management, it's almost always the people pieces. How do you engage leaders? How do you engage end users? How do you get people using knowledge management over the long term? And and then the processes, how do you embed this in the way that people work on a daily basis, and change the fabric of how people work. So those are what's most crucial, which is not to say that you don't need the content and the technology, but a lot of people worry about the technology up front, and they don't spend enough time on the strategy and the people and the communications and engagement. And so we just want to emphasize for you that you look at this in a balanced and holistic way between these four categories.
You just said the core to all of this, which is pull together a very simple strategy. Go back to the objectives we talked about. What are you trying to achieve for the business? What are your goals of the targets you're setting? And then what strategies are going to get you there? And strategies are about processes and projects and approaches that you'll put in place. And that's what you see on this slide, is giving you a range of people, process, content, and technological components that need to go in to support the development or the re-energizing of your knowledge management program. And so I think we have a lot of lessons in knowledge management. It does boil down to a few things, which the first one is so important, as I just said, focus on business issues and tangible value. Nothing accelerates knowledge management more like a problem. So if you can focus on those problems, it's important. Don't start trying to change people's behavior, otherwise called culture, but step back and say, what help do they need? What problems are they trying to solve? They being your customers, people in the business, and encourage their participation in these approaches and processes that will enable them to do their jobs better. It's most important.
Well, and sometimes it comes down to asking for something very specific. Can you go into a community and answer these 3 questions? And that will start you on that path to changing people's behaviors, but you need to ask for something really tactical and really specific, not to come into a boardroom or a conference and say, we're going to have a more knowledge sharing culture, because nobody knows what that means and it sounds scary. So it's both confusing and frightening for people.
Absolutely. And Lauren, number 3 is just that. The hardest thing is to get people to show up. So yes, lunch helps, or something to encourage them, but you have to understand what is really going to help them do their work. That's what people want more than anything, because people hoard their time and energy, not their knowledge specifically. And that's what we see as very important. Again, people don't know what they know until you ask this very specific question. How will you be able to do something differently unless you know what you're asking? And you've got to have people there to respond, or information at the fingertips.
And that's so important, especially for those knowledge retention and transfer types of approaches. People with the best will in the world can want to share their knowledge, but they don't know what to communicate to some of those novices and mid-career people who they're trying to mentor and teach. So there's a facilitation role in knowledge management that's so important to that.
Absolutely. It always comes down to a group of committed people that are at the helm of this. So get people who don't do this on your own. Get people who will come along with you and really work to add value to the business. And in order to be able to show that value, you are going to have to measure at the start. It can start with activity measures of participation, contributions to a knowledge repository, and then you can get more complex. But it's most important so you can actually demonstrate that value.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us and learning a little bit about what knowledge is, what knowledge management is, and some of the roles and enablers that you need to put in place to get started. There is lots more information on everything we talked about in APQC's knowledge base, and we are also happy to point you in the right direction in terms of resources and advice. We are here for that, so we hope that you will learn from this presentation, dig deeper into the research and resources that we have available to you, and also reach out to us if you have questions. Thank you very much, and we hope to talk to you soon.